Welcome. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Jason Vandiver, Building Code Program Manager for SPEAR. I've got a great re-roofing requirements webinar for you today. That's certainly, as a code official, there are some challenges along these lines as far as what the code says, and perhaps, depending on curbs or an old building or whatever it may be, there's a million different excuses of why they can't bring up the roof insulation to code. I've found that about 99 times out of 100, those aren't really valid. I did have one job where, anyway, it's kind of all across the board, but a little bit of housekeeping this morning before we get started. For your ICC CEUs, fill out the course evaluation from Kathy, and she will get you your ICC CEUs. You'll get, are you going to be able to send a PDF of your slides, Brandon?
Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, great. Brandon will send me a PDF of the slides. Everybody will get a copy of those with the course evaluation. And then just for questions, just type them in the Q&A or in the chat. Typically, we'll catch those at the end. If one is particularly relevant to the slide that's on the screen at the time, I might interrupt Brandon and we will take it then, but typically we'll hold those to the end. Just a reminder, I have cases of code books in 2021 IECC code with commentary. I'm pretty happy with the commentary version, and kind of, especially folks that don't know the code very well, it gives you a little more insight onto what some of those sections say when they're hard to understand. If your city would like a codes presentation, just reach out to me. I'm happy. I have funding for travel, so I can come into your city, and we can do it however you like. I can spend all day there with you, or just an hour, or however it may be. If you have some inspectors studying for their ICC, IECC certification, I do like a certification test prep, kind of getting them ready to pass those tests. We can get out in the field, and the field trainings are always the best in my mind, because when you're putting your eyes on something, slides are great and all, presentations are great and all, but walking a job, we learn from each other, and it's a great way to learn. So don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like some of those trainings. Being happy to provide them for you. This morning, we have Brandon Reynolds. I'll let you introduce yourself. Now, don't hold it against him. He's an Eagles fan, but he was born up there, so we can let him slide. But other than that, Brandon, the floor is yours, sir.
Hey, thank you. Yeah. Yep. My name is Brandon Reynolds. Born and raised in the great state of Pennsylvania, right outside the capital, which is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I am not a bandwagoner. I am a Philly sports fan through and through for every sport. So certainly love the great state of Texas. I have some family that moved down there, and you guys got the best of them. They became
what
Cowboys
part they
fans.
moved to?
They became Cowboys fans instantly, and so we have even a family rivalry there.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah, so it's good stuff. But thanks everyone for joining in. I'm happy to be able to give you this presentation today. Just a little bit about myself. I've spent the last 10 years working in commercial roofing, and I'm not that old, so I got started young while I was still in college, working for a company called Carlisle Construction Materials, that manufactures all the components for your building envelope. And I even spent 2 of those years being a warranty roof inspector. So I'm somewhere right around the 2,000 mark on the number of flat commercial roofs that I've been on. And so, I've seen a lot, and I'm hoping to be able to answer all your questions today. And if I don't know something, we'll get with Jason, get me your contact information, and I'll get the answer for you and get back to you. But I am giving this presentation as a member of PIMA. So PIMA is our Polyiso Insulation Association, where 7 or 8 manufacturers are members there. I specifically work for Hunter Panels, which is kind of the Polyiso arm of Carlisle Construction Materials. So we're all a member of PIMA. And happy to talk about the 2015 international codes and some of the clarifications that are now in there for re-roofing. This is a slide that I have on every AIA presentation that's out there, and I always just kind of like you to read through it, understand if there's any questions about our specific products. You know, this isn't a sales pitch. This is for you to learn things so that you can do your job better. So if I try to keep company specific things out of it until the end. And lots of words here, but here's the course description, and I'll try to break it down for you. You know, we're going to look at the Code Council ICC for 2015 and talk about 2018 a little bit. We're going to look at definitions of re-roofing and roof repairs and some things that fall under those categories. And we will compare IBC and the IECC, so building code and the energy code, and how they talk to each other and how they finally sync up. 2015 finally syncs up when you go from the building code to the energy code. And then at the end of it, we'll actually even have a checklist for you that PIMA made after polling some code officials on okay, how can I best remember what to look for and ask the best questions and make sure things are done right. So we made a checklist, and so we'll go over that as well.
I love checklists.
There you go. There you go. And here's your learning objectives, right? So maybe seems like some redundancy here in these learning objectives. If you guys know a lot about the code, so you know how there are things that are minutely different, but you have to go over each part. But really want you to understand the definitions surrounding re-roofing and the energy code requirements within re-roofing for at least the 2015 version of the I codes and later. The earlier ones don't have the requirements in them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I already told you a little bit about myself, but yes, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I have a wife, Sarah, a daughter, Anna, another baby on the way coming in July, and 10 years working in the industry, 2 years as an inspector, 1 year in manufacturing, 5 or 6 years in product management now. And I actually have just made the transition from roof to wall. So I'm now managing our product line where we sell insulation into the wall. But you don't just forget 9 years of what you did in roofing. So PIMA, covers all of polyiso, whether it's roof or wall. So they asked me to step up to the plate here and taking it back for them on this presentation. And so here I am, and I'm looking forward to it.
I got to ask, what percentage of the time do you get carded when you buy beer?
Most every time. Most every time.
You will be our first speaker that's true for.
Yeah, I'm 31 years old, and I get carded just about every time. So I've been getting carded for 10 years, and I feel actually great about it now.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah, so it took me a couple of years, but I love it. I just got carded last week, so good stuff. But one real important thing you guys need to know, re-roofing is important. Re-roofing is very important because it's one of the most common building renovation projects. Let's just say roofs are replaced minimum every 40 years. A lot of times it can be 15 or 20. In fact, the most common warranty duration that I've seen out there as a manufacturer is 20 years, and the second most common is 15. So they're doing some type of re-roofing, usually it's called 20 years, even if they're adding a new roof one. And then it's after another 20 years, so 40 years total, where they're tearing everything off and starting again. But so 20 to 40 years, 20 or 30 years, most roofs, 90%, 88% of what we do are installed on existing buildings each year. So it is the low hanging fruit, and that's the sales pitch. For salesmen that are out there is, hey, Mr. Building Owner, Mrs. Building Owner, you have one chance every 20 or 30 years to upgrade your insulation levels in your roof and have a more energy efficient building. And you're only going to get every 20, 30 years because our roof is expensive. And in the studies that PIMA have done, a code compliant roof assembly can reduce building energy use by an average of 5.7%. That's just an average. There are plenty that are more than that. And you're talking about just one side of the building envelope having that type of impact. So it's very, very important. We want to bring the roof assemblies up to today's codes and standards when we're re-roofing. whether that's structural performance, energy efficiency, or fire testing, this is an opportunity. Reroofing is an opportunity that's found once and every several decades. So to give you a little pie chart here, this is probably the slide here that has the least amount of words on it. So enjoy it while it lasts. Here's why reroofing is the low-hanging fruit of energy efficiency. It's existing buildings. In 2015, 64% of all roofing activity for low slope commercial roofs involved re-roofing. And I would tell you that that number has likely increased. You look at the kind of the new construction boom right up until the Great Recession started in 2006, 2007. How many buildings were we building in 2004, 2005, 2006 before the banking crisis happened? Those are the roofs right now that are coming to fruition, and it's time to re-roof them. And so there's a lot of new buildings, big buildings, again, mostly talking your commercial low slope roofing, that are getting ready to be re-roofed. If we only focused on new construction to impact energy efficiency in all of our nation's buildings, we wouldn't make huge impact. We'd have to wait a while till we start seeing the fruits of our labor. But these new buildings, these existing buildings that they were built new between 2000 and 2006, the energy code required next to no insulation. I mean, they're maybe 1 inch. So now it's time to re-roof them, and the current energy codes are requiring 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 inches of insulation, depending on the type of insulation you're using. So we really have a good opportunity here. So keep this in mind when you see the repair, the re-roofing, new construction. Re-roofing is the low-hanging fruit. And in order to make this clear, we have to talk about definitions. So let's start at the very beginning. I guess that's a Sound of Music reference. Start at the very beginning, but we'll talk about the codes. And in order to understand them, we're going to go through about 6 definitions here. And I think that will be really helpful. I have some pictures that should help you understand it. And then chapter 15, specifically in the IBC, is kind of the Bible for roofing requirements. Like that's our standard. So that's where we'll be spending most of our time, is in IBC chapter 15. So our first one is roof repair. This is the reconstruction or renewal of any part of an existing roof for the purpose of its maintenance. Have a little picture there, a little dark, some shadows there, but there's some drains there. There's clearly some damage, whether it was some ponding water there. So just going up and basically patching probably a 6-foot by 10-foot area. This is a roof. Sorry about that. This is a roof repair. And these definitions are straight from the code. So the next one is re-roofing, the process of recovering or replacing an existing roof covering. See roof recover and roof replacement. So this is very important, that re-roofing is split into 2 types here, 2 different categories, because there are 2 very different types of re-roofing. And Jason and I were kind of talking about that a little bit before everyone joined. So roof recover is the process of installing an additional or new roof covering over an existing roof, without removing it. You're doing a roof recover. Whether you lay down, a thin board and put your new membrane down, or you're installing something directly to that existing membrane, it's a quick skin over, a roof recover. Something that can be done quickly. It's something that can be done if you're on a budget, or if you don't have, if you're budget strapped. And then we have roof replacement, the process of removing the existing roof covering, repairing any damaged substrate, and installing a new roof covering. So basically, roof replacement is removing the roof covering and potentially the whole system, which could be that insulation below it as well. So both recover and roof replacement are considered re-roofing. There will be some code provisions that apply to one or the other of these activities. So knowing the difference is a big deal. If you learn one thing today, these definitions are at the top of the list: roof repair, re-roofing, roof recover, and roof replacement. and they are something that's on the checklist that we'll have at the end. So just again, back to the pictures to try to pull it together. Here's a roof recover, a couple of very different types of roof. You can see on the right, those guys are on a sloped roof, where the other ones are on a flat. But there's an existing metal roof, and they're just installing new joists and putting another metal roof over top of it, right? There's no roof replacement happening or no tear up, so it's just a roof recover. Another example of that could be a single ply roof, where you have a black or white membrane down, and you're going to leave it in place and put another membrane down with maybe just a little barrier board in between. A residential option there would be like on your right, where they're putting a new type of shingles right over top of some existing age shingles. So this is the roof recover. And then here's a good one of the roof replacement. And I tell you, as a former roof warranty inspector, I would also go out and help out with job startups, job in progress visits, things like that. This picture doesn't sell anything short. Roof replacements are messy. You are literally not just taking off that membrane, but you're taking off all components of that system. So the insulation all the way down to the deck, and that means, what if some of that stuff was installed in glue, or an old roof was installed in hot asphalt? You got to tear it up. It's a little disgusting, but this is a roof replacement, the process of removing the existing roof covering, repairing any damaged substrate, or installing a new roof covering, and installing a new roof covering. In this case, there's a wood deck, and you can see they've torn off the whole way down to the wood deck. They have a little bit more tear off to do. And I just wanted to throw this one in here because this is a new construction. You can see a little bit how clean it is. This happens to be some polyiso going down right to what looks to be a concrete roof deck, and they're putting a 1/2-inch gypsum cover board over top of it. So just to show you a difference there of the new construction. There are a lot of roofers that would prefer to only ever do new construction because it's clean, and there are some that want to stay away from new construction because there's GCs involved and some consultants. They just want to do a quick re-roof. So a couple more definitions. I wanted to talk about roof assembly, a system designed to provide weather protection and resistance to design loads. The system consists of a roof covering and a roof deck, or a single component serving as both the roof covering and the roof deck. A roof assembly includes the roof deck, vapor retarder, substrate, thermal barrier, insulation, vapor retarder, and roof covering. So basically, the roof assembly includes the roof deck, and it includes that top layer that's your waterproofing roof covering, and everything in between. That is the roof assembly. It is clearly defined in our code starting in 2015. Roof covering, the covering applied to the roof deck for weather resistance, fire classification, or appearance. And they say covering applied to the roof deck. It doesn't mean it's directly applied to the roof deck, but it can be applied over it. Obviously, there can be insulation, air and vapor barriers in between, or a whole bunch of other things. And then roof deck, the flat or sloped surface constructed on top of the exterior walls of a building or other supports for the purpose of enclosing the story below, or sheltering an area to protect it from the elements, not including its supporting members or vertical supports. So if you've been around in especially low slope roofing, you'll see metal or steel decks, concrete decks, whether it's structural concrete, lightweight structural concrete, lightweight insulating concrete roof decks. And as you get down into maybe Western Texas and New Mexico, Arizona, California, up through Washington, out there, we still see a ton of wood decks, even on our low slope commercial buildings. So that's common, especially in that Southwest and the Pacific area. But mainly we're talking metal and concrete, or steel decks and concrete are the most common ones we see in the low slope commercial roofing world. And then here are just some of the insulation types, since we're going to talk about energy codes. Polyiso is the most common by far that we see in the low slope roofing. It's 75 to 80% of all insulation that is sold is polyiso. And that's because it has a high R value per inch. It has great fire resistant properties. It's lightweight, easy to cut, easy to handle. Some of the other ones that you see out there that are competing insulations are expanded polystyrene, or you guys might know that as EPS, or extruded polystyrene. You might see that, you might know that as XPS. That's usually the colored board you'll see. So there's blue, pink, and green are the main ones out there. I'll leave the manufacturer's name out of them. And you'll also see some mineral fiber, mineral wool out there. Again, those other three, the three on the bottom there, make up about 20%. Polyiso makes up about 80% of what we see on your commercial low slope roofs. And all these are rigid insulation. Rigid insulation is one of the most common applications for low slope commercial systems, but it can also be used in steep slope roof assemblies. And the boards are available with a variety of facing materials. A lot of them can come in tapered options as well. So I don't know if you can see it from this angle, but maybe on my next slide. Yeah, you'll see some tapered panels here. So they can slope them, right? And that way you can have, even though it's a flat roof, a low slope roof, you can get water moving to a drain, even if it's just 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch per foot slope. That is possible. And that's one of the reasons why the tapered insulation, the rigid board, has become so popular. Here's just an example where if they had put what is called a saddle or a cricket tapered diamond thing between the two drains here, we wouldn't have that ponding water here. So anyway, let's get into the code. Chapter 15, IVC, re-roofing. So I want to just read you through that. The materials and methods of applications used for recovering or replacing an existing roof cover shall comply with requirements of Chapter 15. This is a big deal because we never had a really good tailwind to enforce adding insulation during a re-roofing until the 2015 IVC and IECC, and we will talk about that later on. Roof replacement, as already defined in the code. So roof replacement shall include the removal of all existing layers of roof covering down to the roof deck. This is important when it says down to the roof deck because it implies that there needs to be space made. If there's old insulation or wet insulation or damaged insulation, we need to bring it the whole way down to the roof deck so we can start adding more insulation. There is one exception, and maybe you've been on a job like this where the existing roof assembly includes an ice barrier. I think that's kind of old language. It's basically an air barrier or air and vapor barrier, I should say, that can remain in place. I was on one job where these poor guys signed a contract and they were trying to tear off the vapor barrier, and they couldn't. It's asphalt base. It's 39 mils of asphalt. You stick it to a deck. It's not meant to ever come up. And they were literally getting ready to break their contract on a federal government job because they're like, we'll lose money. We can't tear it up. And so this is in there for an important reason. In fact, those air and vapor barriers, typically, they continue to work through many roofs. So that can remain in place. But a roof replacement, we're removing all the materials from the membrane down to the deck and exposing the deck.
Yeah, good luck getting that off.
Yeah, and that's one of the things the company I work for, we make those air and vapor barriers, and so I'm very familiar with them. I've had to tear some of them off a deck before because we do live demos, and it's a nightmare. You end the day with blisters, and you really only tore off like a 10 foot by 10 foot square. We're talking low slope commercial buildings, so that's anything from your 4,000 square foot McDonald's roof to your 1.1 million square foot Amazon distribution center down the road. 10 foot by 10 foot area is not going to cut it.
I have some ugly wallpaper in my kitchen that's similarly adhered. It will not come off.
Yeah, unfortunate, but the air barriers still work. They're still doing their job. They're not ones that usually have, the roofing membrane wears out because of UV exposure every 20 or 30 years, depending on the thickness or the quality of that roof membrane. your air barrier is covered up, it will continue to work. So don't try to fix something that isn't broke. Leave that in place. It actually protects your insulation from vapor drives from inside the building, and will actually make your insulation work better, because wet insulation, the R value is probably cut in half, if not more. So the code allows you to leave that in place. So here's the roof recover. If you remember that definition, the installation of a new roof covering over an existing roof covering shall be permitted where any of the following conditions occur. Number one is an important thing. I think we'll talk about in the next slide, where the new roof covering is installed in accordance with the roof covering manufacturer's approved instructions. This does give some power to the manufacturers, but again, we'll talk about that. And then complete and separate roofing systems, such as the picture I showed you, where they were just going over an existing old metal roof, laying down new purlins or joists and installing another one over it. That they're designed to transmit the roof load directly to the building structural system. So they're not relying on that existing roof. That doesn't, there's no requirement there to remove the existing roof covering. And there's a couple. I'm not as familiar with these. Again, I've spent most of my time in the commercial roofing, but at your metal panel, metal shingle, concrete, and clay roof tile coverings shall be permitted to be installed over existing wood shake roofs when applied in accordance with one of the sections of the code. And then there's an exception here for some coatings, right? So if you're just leaving everything in place and you're taking a coating and just spraying it on, the application of a new protective coating over an existing SPF sprayed polyurethane foam roofing system shall be permitted without tearing off existing roof covering. So one of the good things about spray foam, you spray it down and you can put your coating on, and however often, 10, 15 years, you can just go back and keep coating it again. And your R value should stay intact too with the spray foam. But the spray foam is one of the exceptions there, and I could foresee there being future proposals in versions of the I codes to address covering using roof coatings. Just because I don't think we've done a good enough job at studying what happens to the insulation below them when the roof coverings start to fail, and maybe R value does take a hit. So we'll see what comes up in that in the years to come. The I codes will always use Chapter 1, which is refer to the use of Chapter 1, which is the alternate means and methods for dealing with certain issues. And there's such a variety of roof covering systems in the market. And on existing buildings, the provision was added to provide guidance to the code official. If a manufacturer brings a new recover option to the permit desk and it is not covered by the code, you can ask for the installation instructions and the appropriate test reports. So if the manufacturer has a new technology, a new innovation that can be used, and they've done the wind testing, they've done the wind uplift testing, the fire testing, the structural testing, everything's there, and they have third-party lab testing. This code and that clause about the manufacturers 2 slides ago allows for that manufacturer to bring that to the table, even though it's not necessarily covered in the code. So it's just asking for the right questions there and the right documents. So before we talk about IECC 2015, I'm going to give you, the words aren't on the slide, but I wanted to give a little history lesson from the 2012 IECC. Again, the international code's coming out every 3 years. 2015 was the first time we had really good clarification on re-roofing. And I'll tell you about the 2012 IECC, and when I'm done, you might be confused. I still get confused when I read through these. That's why the 2015 was such an improvement. If you have a code that is super confusing, it contradicts itself, and no one can understand it, and it's left wide open for interpretation, there's loopholes. And you guys might know this, roofers are great at finding loopholes. So a brief history of the 2012 IECC. It read something along these lines: re-roofing for roofs where neither the sheathing nor the insulation is exposed, and also roofs without insulation in the cavity, and where the sheathing or insulation is exposed during re-roofing shall be insulated either above or below the sheathing. That's literally what it said. And you might need me to read it 4 or 5 times. You still probably wouldn't grasp it. But some big errors there. And with this language, the code included basically an exception to an exception. And then there was another 2 different exceptions put in there. So it gave zero guidance on how to meet the intent of the code. And so it was an invitation to chaos. And this language was about re-roofing. It didn't define roof recovers, roof replacements, when there really are 2 different types of projects. And the other thing was, you probably heard me say the word cavity. Well, cavity means that there's a steep slope, right? That a steep slope, that's where your cavity is, below the deck. So if you're doing a low slope roofing project and your state or your local jurisdiction has adopted the 2012 IECC, you can honestly say, well, there's no cavity, so this doesn't apply to me. And that's what everyone did. It needed to say something different than have the word just cavity in there. And then it talked about roof deck. The roof deck, it actually used the word sheathing instead of saying roof deck. Well, if you have a concrete roof deck, you don't have sheathing. If you have a metal roof, you don't have sheathing, metal roof deck, in my opinion. The only time you have sheathing if you have a wood deck, and that's a very small percentage. So the IEC 2012 tried to address re-roofing and energy requirements, and it failed. And so on this slide, starting to talk about some of the IECC 2015 and the definitions that were in there. So thankfully, the 2015 and the 2018 IECC now contain a fix, at least for low slope re-roofing where the insulation is entirely above the deck, and that is most common in at least 46 states where the insulation is entirely above the deck. This change in the 2015 IECC didn't really change the code. It just made it easier to understand for those jobs where the insulation is entirely above the deck. So what changed in the 2015 code, moving from 2012, the definitions. The definitions from the building codes carried over to the energy code as a basis for roof replacement clarifications on insulation requirements. Roof repair and roof recover are exempt from the R value requirements, but the roof replacement are not. So I don't know, I said all this, you probably had plenty of time to read the slide, but the definitions carried over: roof repair, roof recover, there isn't a minimum R value requirement there. Roof replacement, there is an R value requirement there, and we're going to talk about it. And this was the language that needed to be in the code in 2012, right here, that wasn't in there, that's in there in 2015. It says, roof replacements shall comply with tables, you see the numbers there, where the existing roof assembly is part of the building thermal envelope and contains insulation entirely above the roof deck. Those tables referenced there are the ones that have the minimum R value requirements for every climate zone. So it lists climate zones 1 through 8 and what the minimum R value requirement is there. And typically that only applied to new construction, but this one clearly says roof replacement shall comply with those minimum R value requirements on these tables. And they added the language where, the existing roof assembly is part of the building thermal envelope. I think that's just was put in there to say, hey, there's no way out of this. Clearly, when you have a flat roof and you put insulation entirely above the deck, it's part of the building thermal envelope. This is the roof assembly is. And so you need to bring your roof up to minimum required R value, to the minimum R value requirements when you re-roof. Now, this only addresses low slope roofing only. As you guys know, when you have steep slope or anything that isn't low slope, you start seeing them put that insulation in the attic or cavity space under the deck. But hopefully another day, we'll start seeing some things come on other ones that aren't just flat roofs. But in the commercial world, you drive, maybe you fly around the country a lot like I do, and you're looking down at all the white and black flat roofs. That's a huge percentage of our commercial buildings. So this was a big win on the energy efficiency front. The 2018 IECC was updated to include even additional details. So 2012, they tried, didn't work. 2015 was clear, it works. It's, there are now minimum R value requirements in re-roofing when you're doing a roof replacement, and the 2018 even improved upon that. So while the 2015 code referenced the R value tables, the 2018 IECC, as shown here, also includes a component performance alternative as well to total building performance path. So you have a couple of different paths there. The component performance alternative provides additional flexibility for building renovations, right? And I think you see that here. Roof replacement shall comply with section where the existing roof assembly is part of the building thermal envelope and contains insulation entirely above the roof deck. But you can if you're doing a renovation or addition, now you can pull in the total building performance path and make it more of a whole comprehensive project in the building renovation. Yeah, I don't think I had anything else on this slide. This is an example here of the R value requirements. Remember I said it referenced the charts. The 2015 Energy Code said if you're doing re-roofing, it must comply with charts and have those low numbers. Well, here's one of them. You can see the climate zones 1 through 8 on the top, and you can go down to the third line and see the R value. Climate zone 1, we have a minimum R20, and then climate zones 2 and 3 are R25. Climate zones 4, 5, and 6 are R30. Climate zones 7, 8 are R35. And it's very clear, these are your requirements, whether it's new construction or re-roofing. And I am not an expert in U values. I know they're used sometimes here. They're closely related to R values. I've heard they've been described to me by some of our chemistry people. They're like an inverse, but they are used more often in Europe. From what I understand, when I work with some of our European companies, they're always asking about U value. Over here on the state side, I'm almost always being asked about R values, but both are listed here. Okay, so at this point, sometimes I get questions when I talk about energy codes. What about ASHRAE? How does that relate to IECC, or not relate, or how do they, bump heads? Well, under the IECC, there are now 3 compliance options, and the first one is ASHRAE 90.1 is one of those options. There's a prescriptive path, and then thirdly, there's a performance path.
We don't have, it's pretty rare that we have buildings complying using ASHRAE. It's on 97% IECC, I would say.
Very good. There are still a couple states out there that have adopted an ASHRAE code. But starting in 2015, that chart that I just showed you on the page before matches up. ASHRAE is requiring the same minimum R value requirements as IECC is now. Okay, so it's great when you have 2 industry associations or groups like that are kind of championing things and have good visibility. That they linked up. So there's no difference in 2015. There's no difference in 2018, and I'm being told there's going to be no difference in their minimum R value requirements for any climate zone in 2021. So this is a good thing. ASHRAE 90.1 also added the definitions and provisions for re-roofing, right? So ASHRAE 90.1 is on a 3-year cycle. They're a year later. So where we're on the 2012, 2015, 2018 for IECC, ASHRAE is on the 1 year later. So it's 2013, 2016, 2019. So they had a chance to pull in those definitions about re-roofing, roof recover, roof replacement, roof repair. So everyone's speaking eye to eye now. And it's good. It's good for the industry from an energy standpoint. It's good to have 2 organizations like that seeing eye to eye. Continuing on, repairs are still exempt from almost all new building provisions, provided the repair does not diminish life safety. Don't ask me how you determine that, but that's in there. And then roof replacements where the insulation is beneath the roof deck, which again, we start seeing some of that in low slope in Texas, Western Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and up the coast, roof replacements where insulation is beneath the roof deck or it's in the attic cavity like bats are not required to meet new insulation requirements if the cavity is not exposed during the project, which typically doesn't happen. But if it's a wood deck and there's some rotted wood pieces on there and they're starting to take them off, they re-roof and they're starting to, now they have to replace sheathing. Technically, that does trigger adding some R value above the roof deck then once it's installed, or adding, or even adding below, bringing up the R value.
Yeah, so you could have conceivably, a 200,000 square foot roof where you've got 4 square inches that you've got to replace. You've got to replace a square foot of rotten sheathing. My understanding that basically, anyway, Tyler asked a question that's kind of relevant to this.
Okay.
For re-roofing, there's an exception that prohibits a roof recover with 2 or more applications of any type of roof covering on it. What about just taking off an existing TPO membrane and putting down a new one on a roof with 2 existing assemblies, not touching the whole assembly underneath?
Right.
Would they be able to replace the TPO layer without tearing down to the deck and replacing the roof?
Yeah, so I would say yes to that. That you could do that by the way the code is written, because now you're not having 2 complete roof systems down.
Yeah.
Right. You've taken off part of it. But one of the issues is that could happen with that. You take off a TPO roof. Who knows? Maybe it was adhered down. So the insulation that's below it, you destroy that top layer because your rip facer off. So now you probably have to remove some of that. And, it might be time then to consider adding some R value or adding some more insulation there. You have to add something to give you a good service for your next membrane in there. So it can get a little complicated, certainly if it's mechanically fastened TPO sheet, which is most common down there in Texas. Yeah, you could just take off that TPO membrane, and if the insulation is in good form, put down another membrane. And that's the code for now. I do think there's some movement in the code groups out there to try to change that so that, at minimum, you're at least adding an R10, but none of that's been passed yet. That's just stuff that's being presented. And, we're already starting the hearings for the 2024 I code. So to be determined, but good question. Okay. So new roof coverings must meet the code requirements for structural, which is where wind, fire, and your weather protection. That's where even if something that doesn't look like it meets the code, that clause is in there about the manufacturer. You can have the manufacturer be required to show all their third-party testing where they meet it. There's some new innovative stuff out there, some roof coverings. I won't get in, but where if you see them on a roof, it'll be like, yeah, I understand. I just need to see some documentation here on what you did. New roof coverings must not increase the energy use of the building. That's in there.
You pull off a Tesla roof or an integrated PV roof, you would have to go back with an integrated PV roof based on that.
That's right. Yeah. And, I hadn't even thought of that, but that's in there. Now, I don't, an integrated, yes, but it depends. I mean, I think there's an angle here, Jason, maybe where, maybe there's solar on the roof, but that isn't part of the roof covering.
Yeah, well, that's why I specified Tesla or integrated,
right?
Because that would be the roof covering at that point. I mean, that's silly, right. But I like reading code sections and playing devil's advocate. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense because of this or that, and it amazes me how often it's like the 2012 issue. It's like they say air barrier. We had an air barrier webinar yesterday, and it says it in one section shall be tested, and then later, well, if you don't test, then you can do inspection, commissioning. It's like, well, no, it shall be. And anyway, I find discrepancies all the time.
Yeah. Nope. Nope. Absolutely understood. And it's tough to write these things because there's just so many ways you can look at it, and things are changing. I mean, those two situations you shared there. I mean, if those didn't exist, if those types of membranes or roof coverings didn't exist, then you would be fine. So there's always innovation that's changing how the code can be written, interpreted, and then there's a lag effect, right? So maybe that will be addressed in 3 years from now. Just someone has to bring it to the attention. This is like your example you gave, Jason, might be one of those where they put exception.
Yeah.
If you're, and so it's tough. Okay. Oh, and then the last part of that was roof replacements where the insulation and/or roof deck is exposed shall meet the minimum insulation requirements in the code. That is very important. So roof replacements, it doesn't matter if they 20 years ago installed 2 inches of insulation and now an R30 is 5.2 inches of polyiso. They usually do 2 layers so they can stagger their joints. They need to add that R value to get it in there, and it does create some extra work. And you referenced it, Jason. Well, we don't have enough room on our curbs, or we're going to have to lift our units or our parapets. We'll have to build up our parapets. That's true. But I think the average building life in the United States is 70 years or 75 years. That's what some group has put out there. And so how many roofs is that? 4, 5 roofs? So yeah, do it now, because that roof might be around for another 60 plus years or even longer, and it's going to get more roofs.
Right. But what devil's advocate, a building built in the 40s that's getting its last roof before it's demoed, is it worth raising the parapets and changing all the curbs? And well, I've got you interrupted. The word Abdul asked a question. The word expose means, is it for a long time, or once the cover of the cavity is removed, are we required to replace the insulation even if it's going to be recovered?
Yeah, it's the second one. Even if it's going to be recovered, as soon as you tear up down to something and expose it,
then
you've exposed it, add your insulation, right?
That's my understanding as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, that was a good question. So I just wanted to go over the re-roofing checklist. And again, this was PIMA doing some polls and some surveys with inspectors, codes officials, and they helped them to develop this. I'll do a little bit of a look at it at the sections on the right, but it's just a one-pager front and back. The back includes, in a one page, the definitions. I know it's small, but roof repair, re-roofing, roof recover, roof replacement are on there, along with the 3 or 4 important clauses from the 2015 building code and IECC about roof replacement and when things are triggered.
And think about, because you don't want your roofing contractors to have a surprise, and this really kind of lays it all out. I can't tell you how many times when back in my building official days where I would have a roofing contractor come and ask me these questions, because he's like, man, hey, I'm bidding it to code and I'm never going to get a bid if these guys are bidding it and they're going to leave it at R15. They need to bring it up to R25, right? And I was like, yeah, it's not based on the scope of work. It does need to be brought up to R25. So I love this for clarity, making so, there's no qualms, there's no issues there. And those, I'm sure there's some folks on here that are in jurisdictions that do not require roofing permits or re-roofing permits. You please seriously consider it. When I started with Granbury, we didn't, for example. I changed that while I was there, but I think you have to permit and inspect these things.
Okay, that's good feedback. And I don't know if you have a copy of this already, but I can get you a copy if you want one to send.
Yeah,
out.
please. I'll send it to all the attendees. That's a great idea.
Very good. Just make a note of that. Okay, so all the definitions are there. I mean, it's right there on the back for even if you're sending it out for the individuals who are filling it out or using it, or maybe to send it to them before you go out so they can see what's required there. But we have a checklist here. You know, what type of roof re-roofing are you doing? And then on the back of the sheet, it will say, you know, what's allowed, what isn't allowed. The 2 layers rule is in there. The new coating over an SPF roof is, you know, is allowed in there. So this is all good. It's to help you. The recover requirements state that the new roof covering assembly must meet all requirements for new construction, except energy efficiency performance if the energy use of the building is not increased, or roof reflectance requirements. And then roof reflectance requirements depends on climate zone, IECC requirements, and existing roof covering. So there's some other things in there. I'm not an expert on the roof reflectance because that gets more into the membrane, and I'm an insulation guy. But you know, this is. Oh, did I go to the next one already? I don't think I meant to. But yeah, these are just a snapshot of some of the closer project details, energy efficiency requirements, things that can be checked for you with all the information on the back. And I do want to say a note that existing insulation in acceptable condition is not required to be discarded, and it can be reused as long as there's no questions about its suitability for use. So, you know, you open up the insulation, for polyiso example, you can tell it's a little older. It's not crumbling at the edges. There's not signs of bowing or curling or water damage or any mold. That insulation is still going to have a good R value. So some of that, you know, can be left in place, and then they can just add more to it potentially to bring it up. And there'll be some areas where we've been on roofs where it's 200,000 square feet, and all of it's fine except one corner, you know, and they, you know, that's what they're tearing up, and then maybe adding another layer on top of everything to get it up to an R30 or an R25, and then they do their new membrane. So why is this important? Re-roofing, one of the most common renovation projects, and because about 75% of new roofs installed each year on existing buildings. So let's bring them up to the roof assemblies up to today's codes and standards, whether it's structural performance, energy efficiency, or fire testing. We have a big opportunity here. It's only found once in several decades. Roofs are the first line of defense for buildings, whether that's external threats, fire, water, wind. And for the most buildings, it's commercial buildings, it's the largest surface area. So take advantage of the opportunity to add insulation. It's very important. And that's why the re-roofing requirements have been in the ICC, and they've been clarified time and time again. And now it's pretty clear when the roof replacement happens, when it's triggered.
I've had to write more than one letter to an insurance company where an insurance company has balked on a roof replacement on adding insulation to bring it up to code, saying, no, we're just, you know, we're going to replace the roof. And you cite in the code where it's required, and you just let them know, hey, you will not get a permit unless you are planning on bringing this thing up to code.
Mm-hmm. Right. You mean insurance companies will cut corners here and there?
Surprise, surprise, right? It's so
So,
don't get me started.
Well, anyway, I try to have 50 minutes of content, which I have, you know, I'm Eastern time, so I have 10:53. So here's my contact information if you should need it. Did any other questions come through?
I think we covered them all. Occasionally we'll get one come in at the very end, but it doesn't look like we might. I've got to, since I can tell that you are, I cannot minimize. Let's see here. I wanted to show you something real quick before we hopped off, just in case somebody did want to, we get a last second question. Desktop. Let's see here. Options. for just as an Eagle fan. This is where I'm watching football. The appropriate teams represented. No
Wow.
Eagles.
I would come down and watch football there with you, buddy.
That was my COVID project, man. I pulled these logs out of the yard, leftover stone from the pool, 100% by me, built that thing. Oh, hey, a couple of questions. I knew if I'd waited a second. Oh, do you mind giving your email address, Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's my first and last name separated by a period, Brandon.Reynolds at H as in Henry, hpanels.com. Brandon.Reynolds at hpanels.com. Oh, I guess it says I can type an answer in here.
I'm typing it in the chat. Brandon.Reynolds at hpanels.com. It's in the chat if anybody needs to reach out to him. It's always good to have. No. Well, that was all the questions. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for your time. Fantastic presentation, good information. Have you gotten into the weeds in the 2021 yet of the changes? I noticed there were a few that was clarifying some reduction allowances. I haven't really been in the weeds in the 2021 yet, but I did notice there were a few changes.
You know, I haven't gotten in the weeds yet on that. I do have a contact who is in the weeds on them right now, and I was supposed to have a call with him before this presentation, but I was traveling home from Easter weekend and it didn't work out. So I can see what he has and maybe send a little summary out of just some bullet points.
I've got it too. If it's convenient for you, that's fine. But I have a few slides on some of the changes as well. I was just going to get your interpretation. It's really fairly minor, if I remember correctly. I don't think it was all that significant. There were some. Oh heck, I don't remember off the top of my head. Oh, one more question and then we'll call it a day. Oh, just a thank you. Thanks again, Brandon. I'll give you the last word and we'll call it a day. Okay.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. I'm here to help. Any questions you need, go to the PIMA website, PIMA polyiso, polyiso.org, and we have tons of answers on there on R values and things like that, and just lots of really cool state case studies. And you can visit the 100 Panels website too, 100 Panels, Google hpanels.com, and we're in the roof, we're in the wall, and we're involved in helping with building codes. So
awesome. Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye.